I am Joel McLeod.
I'm Roland Talon.
And welcome to the 905er. Mask mandates. I bet those words have evoked some emotional response from you right now. Either triumphant relief at rules being lifted, or a sense of impending dread and defeat. There doesn't really seem to be a middle ground, does there? Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, masking seemed to be the one unanimous action we could take to keep each other safe from catching COVID-19. Then, over the course of the pandemic, the masks shifted from a sign of cooperation and humanity into one of political strife and discontent. The mask is now a symbol of wherever you sit politically in Canada. In fact, it became a shallow pretense of an argument for truckers to blockade our border crossings and bring the city of Ottawa to a halt for the month of February. It was under these circumstances that many of us in Ontario were shocked to learn that mask mandates, along with vaccine passports, would soon be a thing of the past. The Doug Ford government announced that it would be removing virtually all restrictions on COVID-19 health measures, save for long-term care homes, hospitals, and clinics in public transit. Many have cheered this on, despite the fact that the Omicron variant wave had barely ended and signs continued to point to a future wave somewhere on the horizon. It didn't matter, though. The Ontario provincial government announced they were stopping all the restrictions. Only there was one problem. The provincial government actually never enacted mask mandates. If you recall, at the beginning of the pandemic, the province passed the buck on that call to the municipalities and various public health departments around the province, which meant while Doug Ford announced the mask mandates would be lifted, all of the municipalities would have to call emergency special meetings to actually do the heavy lifting of rescinding these bylaws. And that brings us to today's episode. In Halton and Hamilton, councils sat around the proverbial table and debated if they were actually ready to lift the mandates, despite many doctors and epidemiologists requesting more time to see if Omicron was actually finished with us or not. Roland and I expected a very vigorous and emotional debate on this matter from our relative councillors. However, it did not happen. Despite reservations voiced by some, the eager one-sidedness of the vote was on the record. Out of both councils in Halton and Hamilton, only three councillors voted to hold off lifting mandates until a later date. We were perplexed and we wanted to see why this was the case and what were the reasons for these councillors to stand apart from the crowd. So today we are speaking with two of those three councillors. Maureen Wilson is the councillor for Hamilton's Ward 1. She holds a BA in Urban Studies and Political Science, and prior to being elected in 2018 was a principal at the Useful Knowledge Society, a grassroots initiative created to encourage public understanding of and participation in urban issues and city building matters. And joining her is Rory Nisan, councillor for Ward 3 in Burlington. Rory is a career Foreign Service officer who has represented Canada internationally since 2007. And today, both councillors Nisan and Wilson are joining us to discuss the lifting of mask mandates in the 905. Okay, well, I would like to extend a warm welcome to councillor for Ward 3 in Burlington, Rory Nisan, and councillor for Ward 1 in Hamilton, Maureen Wilson, for taking the time from the 905er podcast today to talk about an issue that people I think has gone away, but in many senses it has not, and it's probably going to stick around for a little bit, the issue of mask mandates. So the reason why we had both of you on is because both of you seem to be in the minority at your respective councils on your position on mask mandates in Burlington and in Hamilton. Rory, I'm going to hand it off to you first. Can you maybe just give us a brief, succinct idea of why you were voting in favor of keeping mask mandates in Burlington?
Yeah, thanks, Joel, and thanks for the invitation. I'm quite happy to discuss the issue, and you're right, it was 20-1, so to say I was in the minority would be an understatement, but appreciate that. And if I could put it in one sentence, it would be, normally we remove restrictions when the epidemiological situation is improving, not deteriorating. And that was not the case at the point where we were making the decision this past Saturday, and it continues to not be the case now. So to me, that was counter to our behavior over the last 2 years. And I couldn't find a good reason why, scientifically or policy-wise, to remove those restrictions when things were getting worse.
And Councillor Wilson, I'm going to throw it over to you now to tell us your reasons why you voted similarly at Hamilton City Council.
Thank you. Good morning. Pleasure to be here. Similarly, I premised my remarks by stating I found it to be a very difficult decision in some ways, because I think public health units in Ontario have been wisely guided by the Council of their chief medical officers of health, and done very well not to politicize a situation which regrettably has been politicized for very wrong reasons. But having said that, the public health, one of the standards in which we're to be guided by is looking at public equity, health equity. And that's when you are guided by, you lift restrictions when the conditions are most advantageous for the most vulnerable. It's not personal health, it's public. And we are to be guided by all the determinants that go into affecting health outcomes. That's the distinction between, personal health care versus public. And that's our obligation, in my opinion. And so I looked and read all the information out that week from the Ontario Science Table that showed that we would be going up with the relaxation of restrictions. And Dr. Peter Yune said that was to be expected with closer contacts, but he was asking for a little bit more time. We've been going in 3-week intervals in the relaxation of these devices, and he just wanted a little bit more time to see whether we would plateau or whether there would be a steady increase. And similar to Rory, some of those measures, like our wastewater, which are they're not a lagging indicator, they're a leading indicator, were telling us that we were in fact going in that direction.
What would you have liked to have seen happen? Because I'm getting the sense from both of you that you're not, cheering masks, that these are, super fantastic. Let's keep them forever. But what would you have liked to have seen instead as a public policy initiative towards the lifting of not just mask mandates, but also the vaccine passports, social distancing restrictions for businesses, etc. What in your mind would have eased your mind, or maybe made you vote in favor of a policy?
Yeah, I could jump in there. So I think that masking is such a low cost to the community and entails very little risk that needs to be mitigated, very few effects on the community. So therefore, the risk of taking the masks off has to be lower than the risk of keeping them on, which would mean we'd have to be in a very much improved epidemiological situation in order for me to be comfortable doing that. And there are so many knock-on effects and issues of equity as well, such as for people with compromised immune systems, people with disabilities, and we can't leave them behind either. So wearing a mask carries such a low cost, and our society has gotten used to the idea. And by the way, Dr. Moore said we can't wear masks forever, and I would completely agree with him, but actually that's a false argument because no one is suggesting that we do that. Instead, the idea is, well, first of all, we don't wear masks everywhere, right? I'm not wearing a mask right now. We don't wear a mask at home. We don't wear them in the backyard. We don't wear them in the park unless we want to. It was only in enclosed public spaces that we were wearing them, and it was to protect people. And so it's a false notion that that we would wear masks forever or that we're wearing them all the time. So I just wasn't ready yet based on that.
Let's just jump in. Obviously, the public health aspect to this, and I'm kind of interested in just the political side to an extent. I put the same question to both of you because it may have a different answer, and that's why do you think this vote was so one-sided at Halton Region Council? That this doesn't seem like something where the public is unanimous by any stretch of the imagination. There's a clear, there are people who are anti-mask, there are people who are ambivalent and just will do what they're told because that's what most people are like, and there are people who are like, we should not be taking off masks under any circumstances yet. But the council was like, whoosh, way over here in Halton, and in Hamilton almost as much. Coming to you first, Councillor Wilson, why do you think, I know that Mayor Eisenberger was quite outspoken that this was wrong, but then voted in favour of it anyway. Is it that you've kind of been forced into this, and it was a matter of doing what the province said or bust, so to speak?
Well, I think Mayor Eisenberg, I obviously can't speak for him, but I think from his remarks, and you could tell visibly, he was really grappling with it, and as the chair of public health. And I think the difficulty is, and there is some irony in that the province of Ontario was being asked from throughout for some uniformity, some provincial presence on things like mask mandates. And they decentralized that decision. Every individual hospital was responsible, and every individual business, and every individual not-for-profit, and every individual municipality was responsible for bringing in their own, if they opted to, and that's the thing, if they opted to, their own mask mandate and those sorts of restrictions. And the rationale that was put in behind some of those decentralized public health decisions was that we're a big province, and we're not all feeling the same effects of this. But viruses don't recognize municipal boundaries. They don't recognize individual hospitals or not. And so then for the province to come ahead and say uniformly, this is what we're going to do. And we see in the case of Hamilton that our public health, our population health is very much affected by our income. And we know that those in our most vulnerable neighborhoods, very strong neighborhoods, but vulnerable in terms of their determinants of health, have been affected disproportionately by this virus. And so if we're going to be true to that measure, then we should, we should in principle be able to reflect those distinctions. The challenge, of course, with the mask mandate is it is because we are all mobile. It is very difficult for an individual municipality to have, frankly, its own distinct mask mandate. But that's how we started out from the get-go. Hamilton had its own distinct bylaw for masks and for physical distancing, and now that we are to have a uniform. So that's a challenge, and I think you're seeing council saying, it really doesn't make much sense. However, it does make sense if you're looking at the particulars, in my opinion.
There's a point that you touched upon there, Councillor Wilson, that I want to ask both of you on this. Do you think going back to the beginning of this pandemic, March 2020, and the provincial government, when they started bringing in mask mandates and public health measures, as you said, they sent it down the chain to the public health units, and for municipalities such as Hamilton and Burlington and all the other municipalities in Ontario to have to implement these policies, these mask mandates, these social distancing policies, restrictions, etc. My question to you is, both of you, is: do you think this was fair for the provincial government to pass this on to you? I mean, your Burlington's population of just shy of 200,000, Hamilton's a city of 500,000 plus. Yet you're in charge of protecting all your citizens from a global pandemic. And I'm wondering, as people who had to make this decision, do you think it was fair for the provincial government to kind of pass the buck on to you to make these choices for people? Councillor Nisan, I'll throw it open to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I think that where a differentiated response within the province is required, that's when we would look to public health to be in the lead generally, like our local public health units. But where there's an obvious requirement across the province or even across the country, then that's when you would expect leadership from the provincial government. I have a lot of respect for the jurisdiction of the provincial government over public health matters. Absolutely. In this case, I didn't. I felt that the moral exigency outweighed the duty to listen to the provincial government.
I just want to come back as well. Sorry, no, I won't interrupt there. I will turn it to Councillor Wilson and let you answer Joel's question.
Well, therein lies the tension of public health measures, right? It can't easily be bifurcated because population health is very different. But on measures of a virus that does not respect boundaries, I can only speak for myself as a Board of Health member, in which I think it would have been advantageous, rather than leave some of these decisions, in particular vaccine mandates, to individual entities, and therefore they're depending. They're relying on their own legal counsel. They're having to incur that cost, expense, and consideration. I think there could have been an opportunity for certainly provincial standards on that.
And I would just add that there's definitely a contradiction there, where they did not take the necessary action of imposing the mask mandate when it was needed, and left it to us because it was convenient at that point. And now that it's convenient for them to be the good guys removing the mask mandate, they're more than happy to be back in the driver's seat. And we have no choice, or very limited choices.
Yeah, that certainly struck me that we have such short memories as a society, as a world, really, that we forget that how this happened was, I remember Friday the 13th of March 2020, people stayed home. It was pretty much that day that everybody was like, okay, this is enough of this, we're staying home. It wasn't the province that did it. And then the cities, the municipalities stepped in. Then eventually the province stepped in. And now we're pretending like this was all done. It's frustrating. Anyway, that's just me adding my own comments, which I shouldn't be doing. But anyway, but in coming back once more just to that vote thing, because I thought the Halton vote, and we should emphasize it was the Halton vote, not the Burlington vote, although there was a subsequent Burlington vote too. That was so one-sided. I think it's important we just explore why you think that might have been. Why would you be? I mean, I know so many people in Halton who have very strong opinions on this. I was amazed that you were the only councillor who voted the way you did. Do you have any idea why that might be?
Yeah, good question. I mean, first of all, it was made clear by staff that we have about 300,000 vulnerable persons who, according to the province, should continue to be masking, and that's about half of our population. And then you add all the people who are around those people, and it's practically everybody. There are very few people who are not in close contact with a vulnerable person. So was I surprised to be alone? Maybe a little bit. I was not surprised to lose the vote, however, and I think that's because it would be very hard to take on the province, and we've seen the back and forth in the letters with Minister Lecce, for example, with the Halton, is it Halton Wentworth District School Board?
Yep, Hamilton Wentworth.
Hamilton Wentworth, yeah. So my colleagues were not prepared to step out in that way, and I think a second aspect is that they also really want it to be over. Everybody wants this to be over, which of course I do, and I'm sure Maureen does as well. But it doesn't look like it is. And I think there's just a little bit of wishful thinking around the table, for sure.
Do you think there's any kind of sense of, elections on the way? Let's get this. Yeah, I mean, is it? I mean, it seems to me there's a huge risk if you get this wrong that can, if you're talking about decisions being made, that kind of cliche, they're only doing it for the votes thing. That there's a risk whichever way you go with this of ending up being very unpopular. But do you think there's any of that at play in an election year?
Well, the funny thing, Roland, is that I did offer a bit of a halfway for people, a mitigation opportunity by providing masks, N95 masks to residents. to start with, I think 50,000 and go up to 300,000 if there was demand. And who knows if there would have been, although there was quite a bit of demand in Burlington in 2020 for masks. It's hard to say, but that would have been a way for anybody who wanted to, give a gift to those who were concerned, those who are vulnerable, to say, look, we are doing something for you. The province has made this rule, but here's some mitigation. Here's a way that we can help protect you. And by the way, these masks are fantastic, and they're the only masks that really protect you against others. And, kudos to Mayor Mead Ward for seconding that motion with me, and it didn't get a single other vote. So I was a little surprised by that one. And it wasn't, these are not expensive.
I have one kind of follow-up to that notion. And I think it's a question that's on a lot of people's mind. And and this goes to both of you, what factor did the truck convoy protests have, do you think, in kind of the eagerness that we're seeing to lift these mask mandates?
Councillor Wilson, we'll start with you. Yeah.
I guess I'll try to answer that by stating no decision at any level is done in a vacuum. We're all affected by what goes on around us. But there's an interesting, there's a professor down in the US who's, has made it his life's work to look at pandemics and the politics and the decisions in and around them. And the question of when does a pandemic end? It ends when people decide it ends. So viruses, except for, I think, the exception of smallpox, go on forever. When a society comes to the point where they say, right, done with this, that's when it ends up here, and then it ends in your actions. And I'm pointing to my brain for those listening. But the issue is what is the role of democratically elected institutions in that? Do they accelerate that? Certainly, they have a role in trying to make the most informed decision as possible, so that when we all want this to end, we all want this to go away. We all now look back at the what life was before. Where the ability to just impromptu do anything, without having to think so much about risk. And the inherent exhaustion sometimes that bleeds into our psyche. But it is, what is the role of government in trying to get to that best point, that most informed point, so that more of us, not less of us, so that the most vulnerable, not the most fit, when we get to that point, when we decide it's over, are best positioned to incur less harm. And I guess that's what we all struggle with. And, the truck convoy, that I guess you could argue indicated an exhaustion on some point, but it was, let's be honest. It was people who were using this crisis to advance their own agenda, their own priorities, engulfed in their own fragility and insecurities, baked in hate. That's for me, the pretense of any public health thing informing their activities is nonsense.
Councillor Nisan.
Yeah, great points, Maureen. I would add that, I didn't hear a single drop of sympathy for the truckers among my colleagues ever. Not a drop among reasonable people, really. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the climate that is created of violence and the threat of violence towards political leadership. Every time I see whatever it is, what have we seen? Be it a Nazi flag or a violent image of the prime minister, I cringe, and we all get hateful email as well. The mayor of Burlington has had protesters at her home, people protesting at the hospitals. So let's not kid ourselves. We can all say, well, that doesn't bother me. I don't care. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I think most of us will. But there is a climate there of violence that I think it can play into people's desires for this, just to get over this and get back to being the most popular level of government and having, dealing with overflowing garbage cans and people rolling stop signs again.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, no comment.
The good old days.
It's a real issue, by the way, that are ongoing.
Just to bring in a friend of mine who runs a business actually in Burlington made a point to me, which I thought was an excellent point, which was if the municipalities had gone against the province, the general public, as a rule, wasn't going to understand that distinction. So as far as they were concerned, mandates were gone. And then they turn up at a restaurant or a bar in Burlington and it's put your mask on. And then you've got that kind of threat of you're forcing the businesses to be the referees of what could be a kind of angry and situation. Have either of you, coming back to you again, Councillor Wilson, have you experienced any of those kind of pressures from local businesses which would be completely legitimate if the local business is saying, like, we can't do this. But is that part of the pressures that you get, that businesses like, we really need these mask mandates gone?
I haven't heard that explicitly. I certainly think, we have certainly heard the difficulty of small independent businesses throughout this, and those difficulties are real. And I think everyone, I believe everyone is very sympathetic to that. And I do appreciate your comments in that it puts the onus again on decentralizing decision-making to independent individual restaurants who have to get, in this case, restaurants who have to get into now the business of policing, if you will. And that's not in anybody's interests, particularly when you're already having frontline workers, in this case, if you're serving or at the door, who have, we've all heard stories of them being subjected to abuse throughout this. And I certainly don't want to pile on to that. But at the same time, masks are not lockdowns. It is not restricting anybody's mobility. And I guess I would argue that it's actually equalizing opportunity to socialize. When you're wearing a mask entering a facility or a business, you're in fact facilitating a larger group of people who actually feel more comfortable going in there until they get to the point where they're at their seat or whatever they're doing there. And from a larger perspective, there's a really interesting study out in the Lancet, which does a very thorough review of the costs of masks, or the costs of non-masks to our economy and our healthcare system. And what it clearly shows is it is the most effective, low barrier public health measure, bar none. Not speaking individually to the vaccines, which are, I believe, just a testament to the wonder of science and medicine. Amazing that they were able to do that in such a short period of time. It is amazing. But masks in and of themselves, they're not locked down. They're not restricting your behavior. They're not restricting your travel. It is the thing that has hurt businesses the most has been the lockdowns. It has not been the masks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Roland, just to say that, look, the masks were what was the on-the-ground reality. So for people to continue to do what they were already doing isn't particularly confusing for the majority of people who shop for their groceries or do their retail shopping inside their own community. So that wouldn't be so hard for people to understand. In fact, that's exactly what happened in 2020 when we brought in the mask bylaw. Burlington was very early in that, and other municipalities hadn't yet. Mm-hmm. And, there's always going to be haters. There's people who have been complaining about masks to grocery store workers throughout this pandemic, and they're going to complain after now. And, they're going to say, well, why are you wearing a mask now? There's no mandate. So the harassment will continue in either case, unfortunately. And all that we can do is try to create the best public health outcome and mitigate that kind of harassment. As far as restaurants go, it's been a bit theatrical for a while now, where as soon as you sit down, you can take it off, right? And I think it's really the essential places that need to keep masks on. Places that you don't need to go to a restaurant to survive, but you do probably need to go to the pharmacy and quite possibly the grocery store. Not everyone has a car for curbside pickup, for example, and public transit, which is still on for now. So speaking of confusion, okay, you still need it on public transit. You still need it hospitals, healthcare settings. This is confusing always, but I give residents a lot more credit than maybe those who think they're going to be so easily confused. They can figure it out pretty easily. If you can figure out a vaccine passport, or like when I went to the gym, I had to show my membership card, my driver's license, and my vaccine passport. If people can figure that out, then they can figure out based on a sign on a front door whether they need to wear a mask or not.
We're coming up near the end of this episode. And I only had one final question for both of you, and that's kind of the next steps going forward. And we've had epidemiologists and scientists on the podcast, and they've said, like, another wave is probably coming. We don't know how badly it's going to be or when it's going to arrive, but we know something else is going to come down the pipeline. We're starting to see the signs of it. We're seeing wastewater. Councillor Nisan, you point out that wastewater indicators are starting to rise. Mm-hmm. We're starting to see rise in test positivity around the province. Should we find ourselves in wave number 5? I think we're at now. Mm-hmm. What's your sense on can we reverse it? Can we bring back a mask mandate, the vaccine passports, the social distancing, to kind of maintain our healthcare system so that our hospitals aren't overrun with COVID patients? How quickly can we reverse the tide should we find ourselves back into Omicron part 2, I guess we'll call it. Councillor Wilson, I'll throw it open to you first, and then I'll ask Councillor Nisan to follow up.
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to, but to use one of the most overused words of this period, I guess we all have to learn to pivot. I hate that word now, pivot. But I think therein lies the challenge. In that part of the, there's been no benchmarks, set out publicly. I don't think, I may be wrong, Rory, you can correct me, in which to inform us, at what if the wastewater indicators, if they continue to go up, if we're then starting to see hospitalizations go up, regrettably our testing is less than sufficient. We don't have an indication from the province of Ontario of what constitutes an alarm. We don't have those thresholds set out for us, and nor, frankly, did we have them set out when we went to this into this period. So I'm not, like, I always ask the question when I'm looking at policy, how are we going to measure success when we're evaluating something? But in this case, how are we going to measure alarm? At what point? If none of us, I don't want to speak for Rory, but none of us want things to get worse just to prove our point. Hey, I was right. We should have been wearing masks. This has been an exhausting, expensive experience that has extracted so many costs that are known and unknown. I have 3 children. I see the cost on them and their well-being. It's not fun. It's not natural. We've missed graduations, parties, first-year universities, which have been unusual when that should be a point in their life of just, gosh, grab the world. And we're a privileged bunch in my household. But I think we have a duty to in public health to be mindful of the most vulnerable. And I'm not quite sure what when that point will be if we continue to go up. I know Dr. Yone was saying he was expecting it to go up, but the issue is, will it plateau? And that's what they'll be looking for. But what constitutes, how long does that plateau have to be? I don't know that. And so we'll have to be guided again by what we have learned in the past, and we'll have to respond.
Councillor Nisan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd just say, one thing we have not talked about is the potential impact of long COVID, both on an individual level and on a societal and on the body politic, on public health, on our hospitals in the long run. It's the great unknown, and we over focus on hospitalization rates and pressure on the hospital system. That is a very emergency room driven approach to our own healthcare. If we want to do preventative healthcare, you don't get it in the first place, and you don't risk long COVID. And I'm not the right person to quote studies, but I worry about studies on diabetes and heart disease and chronic fatigue. These are all debilitating illnesses. But in terms of, when we would bring back the mask and all that, what really worries me is that we may be doing a boil the frog approach here, where we just get more and more used to higher case counts, higher death counts, higher hospitalization, ICU counts, and more people with long COVID, to the point now where our wastewater is basically where we were at the end of December when we were all freaking out.
Yep.
And instead, we are all celebrating. Now, it's not an identical situation, don't get me wrong, but you add to that risk of reinfection as well, and there's just a lot of risks ahead for getting back to normal. Hopefully, we are over all these lockdowns. They were awful for all the reasons Maureen said. Just terrible way to live. But masking, I just don't know if any government will have the guts to bring it back at this point, or if they would rather keep things quiet and dealing with long COVID is somebody else's problem. And deaths are so individual and isolated in this pandemic that it's not something you'll feel. If we had a mass casualty event every week of 20 to 30 people, we would all feel it. But a death here and a death there doesn't add up. And again, we're boiling the frog.
I'm just going to sort of dive in and very unfairly take the last word to an extent. But yeah, I mean, I think that point and the point that Councillor Wilson made right back at the start, that to an extent, societies decide when a pandemic is over. Well, society certainly, in my memory at least, decided when the pandemic started because society locked down before government did, before the provincial government certainly. And I'm not sure if society's really been saying it's over, but government seems to be, and it's worrying. And I just want to include a mention. I know both of you have already made this mention. I just want to sort of finish the episode on this note that those people, I mean, I have friends who have been locked down for 2 years, in effect. The only place that they may go to is a supermarket. That's it. They haven't been to a restaurant. They haven't been to anywhere because they have compromised immune systems or other reasons why they're at risk. And the most infuriating thing for me certainly has been that they haven't been talked about anymore by the, and I'm not pointing particularly at municipal government at all, and you didn't vote that way anyway, but I'm talking more about the province really, that suddenly they don't exist anymore. They don't count. Well, that's just, what can you do sort of thing, and throw up your arms in horror. And I find that incredibly, we could say it's time for a change, but if there were other mitigating factors, if like your suggestion, Councillor Nisan, the N95 masks were just distributed much more widely and we made it clear that really they are the only masks worth wearing, perhaps there would be ways to bring those vulnerable people back into society. But I just don't see that happening, and that is perhaps the most difficult thing for me to accept, certainly, out of this whole thing. That was me very unfairly picking my own thoughts into the episode, which is meant to be an interview. But I think maybe we should wrap it up there. And I just want to thank you both very much for making time to speak to us today on what is certainly a very important issue. And, let's hope we don't have to talk about this again, but I fear we may at some point in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.